Good morning. Hello and welcome. My name is Bhuvan Apurvajha. This is the Indian Express Explained. Let's get started. I have three articles for you, three agendas for you. One is a deep dive from the mains perspective, because again, this is a topic that has been in the news, and in the upcoming COP28, this will be one of the key agendas. So you need to have a very good idea of the loss and damage, the fund. Okay, the entire concept surrounding it. What are the problem areas associated with it? And how can you go ahead and address those problem areas? Okay, that's agenda number one. Number two is an article from the Indian Express explained page, which talks about the discovery of tantalum, and you have found that in the riverbed of River Satluj. Okay, so recently you have had lithium deposits, part of hard rock systems that have been found in Riyasi, Jammu and Kashmir. Okay, you have had vanadium that was found in Gulf of Khambat, and now this is the third important discovery that you can attribute to the scientists of IIT Ropar. Okay, and they have found deposits of tantalum in River Satluj. Okay, now we'll go a step further. Pardon me. We'll go a step further, and then we'll understand. Say what exactly is a resource-based conflict, and what are the resource elements or the resource minerals. Okay, what causes them? So you must have all seen different movies. For example, one such movie that comes to my mind is Blood Diamond. Okay, so that speaks about the diamond industry and how it was fueling a conflict. Or recently you find that ISIS went ahead and exploited oil fields to further their conflict. So what is that concept? We'll seek to understand that. And number three is the E prime layer. It's a update in the geography realm. Okay, you find that the core mantle boundary is of interest insofar as E prime layer is concerned. So we'll understand all three of them in detail, right? And you will go ahead and access the PDF of this particular lecture on my Telegram channel that I will upload around noon. All right, let's get started now. So loss and damage funding blues, unanswered questions and unattended concerns. This is agenda number one. Now, what is loss and damage? So you have environment change, climate change that is happening, and that is leading to, say, adverse effects that are being felt across the world. Okay, this is a primary misconception that only the developing world, in fact, feels the brunt of the climate change. No, this is, when you see a particular climate catastrophe, it does not see whether it is a developed country or a developing country. Okay, so the loss and damage concept is to go ahead and compensate for those events that can be attributed to climate change. Okay, and we are looking at two methods, adaptation and mitigation. Okay, two methods of, say, loss and damage. You're looking at adaptation, which means you will introduce resilience in the system so that the system is better equipped to go ahead and deal with climate change. And then you're looking at mitigation, which is to again go ahead and plan and design in a manner in which communities, systems all together are going to deal with climate change. Right. So this was achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh, COP27. You must have all been following that news. So now in the COP27, you had a transitional committee that was set up. Okay, and that transitional committee's entire job is to form consensus, because this is a very tricky area, and we will see why it is tricky. Okay, so the loss and damage concept right now is a very controversial area that is now gaining relevance. Suddenly you find that the Western countries that were so far up until now not very happy with this entire idea, not giving their support to this entire idea, suddenly have turned around and now are much more open to this idea. What caused the turnaround? We'll understand that too. Okay. So culmination of years of relentless advocacy. At Sharm el-Sheikh, you had the loss and damage fund that was established. Now a transitional committee is going ahead and looking at the more significant aspects of that loss and damage fund as to how it will work. They are expected to go ahead and frame consensus, and then that will be presented in the COP28 that is to be held in just a few days from now in Dubai. Okay. So many issues need addressing regarding loss and damage. Okay, let's go ahead and understand them one by one. But first, you see this. In terms of top 10 most expensive disasters of the past decade, right? So again, a primary misconception that climate catastrophes are only, only the developing countries are facing it. No, you have both developed and developing countries, global north and global south, that are facing climate catastrophes. But then, one question that you need to consider is the capacity to respond, right? In terms of capacity, what you find is that the developed countries are better placed, right? They have the money, they have the infra, right? Whereas the developing countries are ill-equipped. They just do not have the money, okay? No money, hence no infra here. So you see what happens. In case of a climate catastrophe, okay? So the ability of both of these to respond to a climate catastrophe is inherently different, right? Which is why these set of nations are now saying that, well, is there a way we can be compensated for all of the losses that we are taking? Okay. Now, is a loss just monetary? For example, in 1991, okay, if you go ahead and look at the entire history of this, okay, let's consider that first. Right, in 1991, you had an alliance of small island states. So you must have all heard of countries like, say, Tuvalu, Fiji, right? So all the countries of, say, Polynesia, Micronesia, right? Melanesia in the Pacific Ocean, right? All of them came together. And then you had an informal alliance that was formed. This happened in the year 1991. The first time ever that an alliance of small island states, okay? So they came together, and then they went ahead and said that, well, see, the sea level is rising. Okay, we are at first at risk. So is there a way we can be compensated? Now, the compensation from the monetary perspective is okay. You can quantify it. But then the non-monetary perspective, for example, if you have an island, now that is susceptible to sea level rise, right? So for example, the island's gross productivity, you can go ahead and quantify it, say amount X. But what about the other heritage of this island? Say endangered species, say the culture of the people. That also is lost because eventually you will have people who will have to go out from here, move out from here. So the people lose their identity. Their cultures get lost, their languages, their traditions. Now these are non-monetary aspects. Can they also be compensated for? Right? So 1991 is the first time ever that loss and damage concept was introduced at the UN platform by the Alliance of Small Island States. Now, small island states, they are again an informal consortium. You find that they are from Pacific Ocean, from Atlantic Ocean, okay, from Indian Ocean, the West Indies, all of them together. Okay, from South China Sea also. You have Singapore, that is a part of the small island states. Okay, so Fiji, Mauritius, Seychelles, all of the islands that you can think of. Sri Lanka is not, by the way. Okay, here is an MCQ that could be asked. Sri Lanka is not a part of the small island states. So now these particular countries come together. Now fast forward and you are coming at, say, the Paris Climate Agreement of 2015. Okay, the Paris Climate or the Paris Accords that we know of. Okay, now there is a catch here. While it does speak about, say, loss and damage, okay, it does not make it, say, legally enforceable. And a very good twist of English is used there. So we'll see that. See how the word shall and should completely change the meaning of the sentence insofar as legal applicability is concerned. Okay, and then you have obviously the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, and now the landmark that you're expecting in COP28 in Dubai. Okay, so how is it going to play out? In the middle, you have had Bonn meetings and so many other relevant, say, have gone through. But this is the general timeline that you're looking at, the rough outlook. Okay, now you obviously are aware that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, right, which came as a product of Rio 92, the Rio 92 summit, the landmark summit. So that gave birth to this particular convention. And under this, you have the Conference of Parties, right, which is like a forum where all the countries, all the stakeholders, just not government, but also private stakeholders all come together to forge consensus, figure out the way for the next, say, next step that has to be taken insofar as climate change is concerned. Right. So this is the general chronology that I wanted to introduce before you. Now let's go ahead and understand the timeline. So this is much more easier for you now. Yes. First, you had the Alliance of Small Island States. That said, well, we are at most at risk, do something about it. Then at COP19, the Warsaw International Mechanism that came up. Right. Now, this was diluted at the last moment. This was again not legally enforceable. And then the Paris Climate Accords, once again, no legal mechanism or financial obligation. This was just, as you say, बस verbally commit किया, काम कुछ नहीं किया. ठीक है? So this is what happened in terms of the timeline. Now here it is what I want you to figure out. Why is loss and damage not legally binding? Point you should consider. Okay. Why is it not legally binding? Guys, welcome. Bulbul, Yathendra, your neighbor, Coder. Welcome, welcome guys. Thanks for joining. So you see, the Paris Agreement is legally binding as a treaty under the Vienna Convention on Law of Treaties. So yes, as a treaty, it is legally binding. But certain articles are not legally binding. And how? The word should and shall. This is how countries have gone ahead and escaped, say, accountability. Right? So wherever you find the word should has been used in any of the articles, well, that is not legally binding. And wherever the word shall has been used, then there is a legal obligation. And thus you find 8.3, Article 8.3. Parties should enhance understanding, action and support, including through Warsaw International Mechanism for loss and damage, which means it becomes not legally binding. You see how the accountability has been escaped, right? So as a treaty, it is, yes, legally binding, but then certain articles are absolutely not. The loss and damage concept, not legally binding. Now, identifying the issues with loss and damage. Now that you understand that we are going to go ahead and quantify my losses as two types. Okay, the monetary losses and say the non-monetary losses. Right? So you're looking at, say, culture, traditions, wildlife, okay, flora, fauna, all of that. Which once lost, well, you know it's not coming back. Language, right? So now the definitional issues of attribution. Attribution is essentially nothing else but who. You know, you are assigning responsibility. So how do you assign responsibility? That is also one say pain point. Valuation issues. So you're looking at monetary valuation. Okay. So monetary valuation also has certain challenges. For example, let me give you a very brief example. So you have point A and point B, right? And you have a bridge in the middle. So here is a bridge. Now you have flash floods that go ahead and destroy my bridge. So under the loss and damage concept, are you just looking at, say, quantifying that, okay, my bridge was, say, worth 200 crores, for example. Let's consider. So yes, is this just my loss? Or do you also consider, for example, person J? He used to work daily from A to B and go back using this bridge, right? So now because of the loss of this bridge, for someone like person J or many others like him, now you have a loss of livelihood also, right? Market access is broken. So many other challenges come up straight away when you consider that people, actual people are using the bridge. And the lack of that bridge will affect their lives too. So do you consider that too? You see, so this is again the problem. Briefly I'm saying, we'll again discuss in detail one by one. But are you understanding the problems that are associated in terms of interpretation of loss? Okay. And then you're looking at financing issues and revenues. Exactly. Who pays? Okay. कौन finally अपना checkbook निकालेगा? Who's responsible for going ahead and paying all of this? Is it just the developing countries, the developed countries, or both? Okay. Will the private sector be also involved or not? So many other issues now come up, especially when you look at the monetary aspect of it. Confident, law class, good morning, welcome. Okay. So let's go ahead, understand them one by one. Definitional issues now. Number one. First you find is that it lacks a precise definition. Okay. Under international laws also, there is no precise definition that you will ever find of loss and damage. Okay. An interpretation of that is provided, but a uniform definition is missing, which is why countries are free to interpret it in their own manner. Now you see when you look at the different challenges, okay, so many factors come up when you consider loss and damage and say people associated, people who are undergoing that loss. Okay. Then you're looking at economic loss and damage, like I told you, and non-economic loss and damage. Correct? Now, for developed countries, this is what the Western world's argument is. Their understanding of the role is just that we will give money, okay? We'll give you money and build your infrastructure. But developing countries think, and they are responsible for minimizing their vulnerability. Now, do you see the problem with this statement? This vulnerability is not a product of, say, 1-year policy or 5-year policy. right? It can't be. For example, you had Pakistan that was hit with floods recently. 1/3 of the country was underwater, right? Now, Pakistan as the nation is a byproduct of colonialism. That the country does not have sufficient resources to meet the tragedy that unfolded before it, right, is not just a product of, say, Pakistan failing as a state since 1947. That is a very myopic outlook. Okay. So, does the colonial masters also then have a responsibility in giving that financing gap? Should they also give money? Because again, Pakistan's reality is not just based on, say, what they did in 2022 or what they did in 1947 to 2022. Right? You have to consider the whole argument. Okay? And then these definitions are overarching and broad, and thus you find that because of a non-uniform definition, yes, the first point only, since you do not have a non-uniform definition, you lack agreement. Consensus building can't be achieved. So the first step to achieve consensus, go and have a uniform definition. Number 2, the issue of attribution. Okay? Now, attribution, like I told you, is to assign responsibility. Who is responsible? Okay? And to what extent? Okay? These are the 2 points of attribution. Who is responsible and to what extent? Now, how does this problem arise? From various sources. The first is with respect to which aspect of loss and damage can be attributed to climate change. Now, let me give you a small example to make sure that you understand this point thoroughly. Okay. For example, it has been observed in the Indian case, right? In the Indian case, it has been observed that, say, your Sundarbans, right? Your Bangladesh area, the whole Ganga, Yamuna, Meghna, the whole basin there, right? Now, you are observing that this is shrinking. This is shrinking now. So, one concept might say that this is happening due to, say, sea level rise. Okay. I'm giving you just one example. Now, so many other examples can come up. But many people will say, and scientists will also say that, well, this is happening due to sea level rise. And that's, you find that the whole delta is shrinking. But then, further research tells us that you have a Farakka barrage here. And that Farakka barrage is essentially withholding all the sediments. It does not allow all the conglomerates to pass through. The sediments cannot go through up until the Meghna basin. Which is why you find that due to the lack of alluvium or the lack of siltation happening, that the whole delta is now shrinking. So you see, things are not very straightforward when it comes to geography, right? You have several, factors that can lead to a particular consequence. A very simple example. Now, if tomorrow you were to go ahead and ask money from the Western countries that, oh, look, my delta is shrinking. People are undergoing loss of livelihood. Cultures are being lost. Traditions are being lost. Give me money. Compensate me for it. But then you find that suddenly that, oh, there is another reason also. That is your own doing. That has nothing to do with, say, how our colonialist masters exploited us. This is a government policy or a policy of the organization that is dealing with it. Okay. So this is the problem of attribution. Secondly, how a particular event related to only climate change and how are developed nations only responsible for it. So we'll go back to the Pakistan example. You had floods there, right? Now, the Pakistan administration might come up and say, you know what, the European Union owes us money. For example, if they did so, the European Union is well entitled to ask them, how did you arrive at that conclusion? Why not say the US of A? Why not China? Why not you yourself? How is it that climate change is solely the prerogative of the West? Right? Okay, historically they have been, say, the highest emitters as a byproduct of industrial revolution reaching there first. Fine. Access to coal came there first. They burnt most of the coal. Then you had colonialism that came as a byproduct of that industrialization. And thus you find that they have the majority of the responsibility. Agreed. But in modern times you find that China is the highest emitter. And China also has been, well, it has its own set of problems insofar as its history is concerned. Okay. So, does China also own responsibility? Now, the problem is that under UNFCCC guidelines and the UNFCCC rules, you find that China is categorized as a developing country. So, by that logic, China shouldn't be giving any money in spite of the fact that they are the highest emitters in the modern times. You see? So, not very straightforward now, is it? So many factors are pulling it and pushing it from all directions. Thus, consensus is difficult to be achieved insofar as loss and damages attribution issue is concerned. Got it? Let's go forward. Now the valuation issues. So how do you quantify how much is lost? To what extent? Right? So you had developed countries that agreed to pool 100 billion each year. Right? This was agreed in the COP26 2021. Now in 2025, it is expected that this will go ahead and rise to 1 trillion annually. Do you realize? The money that is there is not going to be enough. Okay? We need more money firstly. And then that money has to be distributed. So there is to be a mechanism to that. That also needs to be developed. Okay? Accountability should also be there in the system so that countries do not use this money for any other purpose except, say, building resilience in their system, adaptation and mitigation efforts. Right? You can have rogue nations that can use this kind of money if it's given to them under loss and damage concept for, say, some other nefarious means, for terrorism, for misinformation, whatever. Right? You can have, if you give it to North Korea, they'll probably build missiles. Right? So you need to have accountability in the system also. Okay. Also, which is the financing? How do you go ahead and understand the valuation? That bridge example that I told you about. That yes, the bridge, cost of the bridge has to be recouped, but then the other factors associated with that bridge. Right? So for example, I drive to work daily and I cross a particular small bridge. Now if that were to be lost, I would find it incredibly difficult to get to my office. Right? So I might have to consider plan B or shift to another job or shift to another city, whatever it be. So many possibilities come up. So should I be compensated for that if that bridge is washed away due to flash floods? Well, that's again another question. Okay. Losses in ecosystem services, your productivity declines. Yes. Your productivity not just of the, say, floral productivity, the flora, but also the fauna. Both decline. Now, again, this has impact on livelihoods. Right? And not just livelihoods, but the ecosystem services that each of them do. Right? So you're looking at overall climate susceptibility of that place increasing. Yes, the instability being introduced in the system. Okay? And obviously you find that it's the poor who are the most at risk out of all of this. Even in developed countries, you will have the poorer people who will be the first, the hardest hit as a result of any of this that happening. Okay? And finally, you're looking at financing avenues and instruments. So let's look at it. Grants versus loans. Very simply understand. Loans you have to pay back. Grants you don't. Okay? And now you find, go back to the, if I tell you about the Mozambique example. So Mozambique in Africa was hit by a cyclone recently. Okay? Obviously, being a very poor country, it did not have the financial resources. So it went to the IMF. Okay? And asked for, say, some sort of money. Okay? Give me some sort of money to go ahead and rebuild. Right? Now, what does the IMF do? IMF says, well, we'll give you a loan. Firstly, it was introduced as a high interest loan. You see, then there was a lot of international outcry, a lot of criticism. Countries were like, what is IMF doing? You know, it's not Mozambique's fault that they had to deal with the cyclone. So why are they being charged? Because again, loan will come with a certain percentage. Mozambique will have to pay it back. Then eventually, after much criticism, you had the IMF that offered a 0% loan. They still didn't agree to give a grant. Right? So what happens? If you give grants, you don't expect it back. But loans, you expect back. Right? So this grant versus loan scheme needs to be figured out. Do you want the countries to pay back the money that you are giving as loss and damage? Or should it be a one-time or one incident related payment that you are doing? Okay. Now, one proposal by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, that said that you go ahead and tax profits from fossil fuels. But then the fossil fuel industry will not probably agree to this, given the fact that COP28's chairperson, he is a president of a major oil conglomerate. So this issue may not find that much traction. Okay. What are the other alternatives then? You have financial instruments like debt swaps, where your current debt, for example, if you owe 100 rupees to, say, a particular institution X, so that institution X says, well, you did not pay me 100 rupees anymore, use this money as loss and damage. Right? Use it to build resilience in your system. These are debt swaps. And then you're looking at involving private sector. Eventually, you are going to have private sector that needs to be involved if you are going to build resilience in every system. Okay, it can't be just public money that can come up with it. Now, how do you do that? So you can have innovative instruments again, loss and damage bonds. You can have loss and damage credit ratings. You can have a system where the CSR initiatives that a company goes and gives a particular part of its net profit for say developmental activities. You can mandate it by law that it needs to go ahead for loss and damage activities only. Why? Because you find that the tendency is that under CSR initiatives, companies go ahead and invest money in, say, a wind farm, wind generating farm somewhere down south. And thus, they are looking at the monetary aspect there too. Right? Money often does not travel to the hinterlands, but it travels to the more commercially lucrative areas. So to go ahead and supply this gap needs to be filled now. Right? It's not just sending money, it's about making sure that you send money to the right areas. Right? So this is again another initiative that could be considered. Okay? Right? Let's go ahead and answer this very quickly, my friends. Which of the following publishes the adaptation gap report? United Nations Environment Program, International Institute for Sustainable Development, both A and B, none of the above. Right? You let me know your answers in the comment box like you always do. Which of the following is not a part of the Alliance of Small Island States? We discussed Alliance of Small Island States in detail today. So is it Fiji, Tuvalu, Singapore, Sri Lanka? If you followed the lecture, I think it will be very easy for you. Let's look at question 3. Developed countries acknowledge their historical responsibility in global warming and committed to donate 1,000 billion a year from 2020 to help developing countries to cope with climate change. True or false? UNFCCC owes its origin to Paris Climate Agreement 2015. True or false? And Conference of Parties owes its origin to UNFCCC. Okay? Let me know your answers to Yathendra. Just after the class ends, आप जल्दी से comment box में answers लिख देना सारे के सारे. ठीक है? Do let me know your answers, friends. Very quickly before I go forward, in less than 60 seconds, the entire focus, like the way I went ahead and explained loss and damage to you, right? End-to-end discussion, giving you the entire scope of the discussion, is the mantra that we at StudyIQ IAS follow. Okay, and to that extent, new courses are beginning soon. Okay, the English batch begins very soon. In fact, just a couple of days, 24th. Okay, the English batch on 25th, and the Hindi batch starts tomorrow, 23rd. Right, be a part of this initiative. Okay, I am associated with the with the English and bilingual batch. Okay, I'll be responsible for geography, for reading comprehension CSAT, for international relations, and my esteemed colleagues will take care of the other subjects for you. Okay. If you haven't started preparing yet, well, this is your last call. After this, the train leaves the station. Right? So make haste, use the code BALIVE, get associated with the program, and the best part is that if you clear your prelims, which I'm certain you will do, if you go ahead and follow the instructions that we ask you to do, right? Then you go ahead and join us in New Delhi for the mains preparation, which is the landmark scheme, which is the landmark initiative that StudyIQ IAS has come up with. Great. Chaliye. Next topic. So tantalum, the rare metal found in Sutlej. What is tantalum? So you find that IIT Roper researchers have found tantalum in the riverbed of Sutlej. Okay. Now, where is tantalum used? In the electronic industry? Okay. Which means straight away you realize it's got a lot of commercial importance. Okay. The annual report of the Union Ministry of Mines, in fact, in the Indian Mines Yearbook, Minerals Yearbook, sorry. In the Indian Minerals Yearbook that is published by the Indian Bureau of Mines, you find that it is listed as one of the, well, now it is 6, but earlier it used to be 12 critical and strategic minerals. Critical minerals are what? Essentially, they are, firstly, they have supply chain vulnerabilities, which means you are dependent on a particular source, and that source is not very dependable. Okay, that the concentration might be, say, less there. Okay. Number 2, it is absolutely imperative for economic security. Right? So it drives, that particular mineral drives a major part of your economy, and you're also looking at the sovereignty aspect. Right? The sovereignty and security of the nation is also to be taken care of by having access to these critical and strategic minerals. Okay, recently you find a lot of work has gone insofar as the minerals has concerned. The Mines and Minerals Amendment Act came through, which opened the private sector insofar as exploration and research insofar as these minerals is concerned. Right. So what is tantalum? Let's go ahead and understand that. This is what it looks like. Very shiny, in fact very ductile. So chemistry lessons now. What is ductile? That you can go ahead and beat it. Let's go ahead and understand tantalum one by one. Firstly, grey, heavy, very hard, and one of the most corrosion resistant metals. Okay. To most acids, I think it is resistant. Only hydrofluoric acid it reacts to. Okay. It possesses high corrosion resistance. Why? Because as soon as you expose it to air, it forms an oxide layer. So thus it is very resistant to corrosion. So which means what? That you are going to have a lot of application of it. Okay. Number 3, it is ductile, like I told you, meaning it can be stretched, pulled, or drawn into a thin wire. Best thing about it. Okay. High melting point also. So what happens? Because of these properties, you find that, well, you make capacitors. What are capacitors? That store energy for you? Okay. Again, class 7th physics. Capacitors, you can store energy for short time periods. So capacitors store more electricity in smaller sizes without leakage. Thus, portable electronic devices, all your iPhones, your iPads, you will have tantalum that will be embedded in it. Okay. And because it has high melting point, you find that it is used as a substitute for platinum. Right? Platinum is a lot more expensive, a lot more rare. Tantalum, you can go ahead. The best thing about it now, tantalum, you can also recycle it. Once used, you can recycle it. In fact, the global averages right now tell you that, and we'll discuss which countries are the primary producers of tantalum, but you find that at the rate at which tantalum is being consumed right now, the world will run out of tantalum by 2060. Okay, we'll be running out of tantalum. So again, do you realize why it's a critical mineral? Why it's a very important mineral? If it has these properties and say these applications and is of limited availability, right? So now what you find is that tantalum is categorized as a conflict resource. If any of you have seen this movie, Blood Diamond, that stars Leonardo DiCaprio. So this movie talks about diamonds and the illicit diamond trade that used to happen in Africa, and that well obviously had a lot of say human exploitation that was driving it, channeling it. So tantalum is also a resource conflict resource. Okay. What are conflict resources? Very quickly. Natural resources extracted in a conflict zone and sold to perpetuate the fighting. Very, very important from the UPSC exam perspective. Okay. Now, the best example I can give you. So you had ISIS. To perpetuate the fighting, to prolong the fighting, they took care of the oil fields. You see, because eventually you need money to wage a war. And that money comes from say some particular natural resource if you're living in a resource rich area. Then that particular resource get categorized as a conflict resource. Okay. So blood diamonds, the best example, right? Tantalum is a conflict resource. Why? Because you have this being, again, this year's question, UPSC PYQ 2023. This year's question asked you about cobalt. Where was cobalt found or most extracted? The answer was Congo. Similarly, you find that in Congo, you have tantalum that has been extracted and that is coming at a human cost. Okay. If you have ever gone ahead and researched deep into this topic, you will find that children, kids, small kids are actually child labor is being employed forcefully. There's a lot of exploitation of men, women, senior citizens, children, insofar as this illicit industry of tantalum mining is concerned, right? Which is why you find that it is categorized as a conflict resource, because the more the tantalum you extract, the more the people who are in charge there go ahead and exploit the people below them to extract more and more tantalum. So you see how this is like a feedback loop it is becoming, right? So this is the entire conflict resources concept. Okay? Now let's look at the distribution of tantalum. So prior to 2010, this is prior to 2010, you had Australia that was number 1. Okay? Australia was prior to 2010, it was the main producer of tantalum. But now what you find is that suddenly the world production has shifted. No more is Australia number 1 now. You find that majority of the tantalum production has now shifted to Africa, primarily the country of Rwanda and Congo. Why do you think that has happened? This, you are getting cheaper tantalum, okay? And that is, well, companies are not having to go ahead and justify where they are getting the cheaper tantalum from. Okay. So beginning in 2007 and through 2014, the production has dramatically shifted from Brazil and Australia to Congo and Rwanda, right? And it is estimated that tantalum will run out by 2060. You see, supply chain vulnerabilities. If you look at our definition of supply chain vulnerabilities, it is what? That either it is in less quantity or the country from which you are importing has, say, instability of some kind. It could be political instability, military instability, or anything of that kind. So you're not assured of getting your supply on time. So it's a vulnerable supply chain, right? So thus you find that tantalum needs to be recycled if you are going to fuel your industries. It has high melting point. It is used in portable electronic devices. So it is going to be of immense value in the coming decades, right? And India has found reserves of this, not reserves, traces of this in the Satluj river. Go ahead and answer these questions for me very quickly. Which of the above is or are part of the criteria to determine critical minerals in India? Okay, we have discussed this. Essential for economic development, critical for national security, vulnerable to supply chain disruptions, lesser polluting potential. Okay, simple question. If you have followed the discussion in totality, this should be relatively easy for you. Let's go on to the last topic, but before I do, the set of 18 books that StudyIQ IAS has come up with, very well received by the student community. Well, you find that this is on sale too. Okay, go ahead and use the code BALIVE, right, and access the set of books for yourself at this very low cost. Okay, if you go ahead and get 18 books together from any other publication, you are looking at shelling out a sizable amount of money, roughly 9,000 bucks minimum, right? Okay, so E prime layer at the mantle core boundary, what has been found? Well, this is the structure of the interior of the earth for those of you who are seeing this for the first time, although I don't think it should be the case. Okay, so you have, this is the area of our interest, the boundary of my outer core and my mantle. At this place, what has been found? Simply, in 2 minutes, I'll go ahead and explain this to you. You find that, well, water that is going in as a part of subduction processes, right? Now, the early understanding was that, well, water does not reach up till this area, that it finishes far ahead of that area. But scientists recently, South Korean scientists have found that this entire water goes up deep into the Earth's surface. And eventually, you're looking at the formation of a film. A film is formed here in this particular area. And this film is being called as the E prime layer. Right? So what is happening? Water reaches the core mantle boundary, reacts with the silicon and forms silica. Thus this chemical reaction, high pressure, intense temperature. So you have this compound that is formed that spreads and forms a film. Right? Now how does the film behave? What is the significance of the film? Very simply put, it enhances our understanding mostly of our water cycle first. So if you look at your water cycle figures, you will find often that we stop at groundwater. But if you go ahead and consider the totality of water cycle, because again, when water seeps down underneath, some of it does go ahead and interact with your deep surface processes that are happening, right? And your temperature is increasing, your pressure is increasing. So the water behaves differently. So our water cycles understanding is improved, and you also find that we're understanding the anomalies of the Earth's interior. Now, why does P wave behave this way? Why does S wave behave this way? Why is the zone of shadow being formed? So many answers can be figured out by going ahead and understanding more about this topic. Right? Kashish, which question is it? Let me know you. You answer all the questions for me. We'll discuss the correct answers in tomorrow's class. Okay? Right? This is a question I want you to answer. Consider the following during the evolution of the Earth. Degassing, differentiation, photosynthesis, loss of primordial atmosphere. So basically the story of Earth being a ball of fire, okay, eventually becoming, say, this blue planet that we know of today. So how did that happen? What are the processes involved is what I'm asking you. Okay, which happened first? Very easy question if you are just aware of this process. The transition from a ball of fire to this blue planet that we know of today. Right? So if you have any questions for me, you go ahead and connect with me on my Instagram. I'll be more than happy to address your concerns. Let's look at the questions of yesterday. Glass buildings, construction, south facing buildings, grey water used for gardening. Which of the above adds to the overall efficiency of a green building? Now, firstly, my apologies. Okay, all the options here are incorrect. I'll tell you why. Green buildings trap more heat. Yes or no? Which means your ACs need to be more, you need to have more electricity consumption. So obviously it does not add to the efficiency of a green building. Correct? Similarly, constructing south-facing buildings, absolutely true. Right? The more your buildings are facing towards the south, the more insulation they can receive. Right? And grey water used for gardening, you find that, well, grey water is the non-fecal water that is used. Okay. So in terms of grey water, it does have microbes and bacteria, but plants are resistant to that. Okay. So this could be correct. So essentially you're finding C is the answer. Okay. My bad. C is the answer. Herein, the Energy Conservation Building Code launched by the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, correct? It is under the Ministry of Power, not the New and Renewable Energy. So the correct statement here being just one, A. Integrated Child Protection Scheme mandates the setting up of district child protection units. Absolutely correct. DCFUs are mandated at district, block and village level. True. And they are headed only by the district magistrate or the divisional commissioner. So the correct statements here being B. 1 and 2 only. Right. And finally, which of the above are true for CARA? It's a statutory body under Ministry of Women and Child Development. B being the answer once again. And which of the above are consequences of ozone layer breakdown? Okay. It goes ahead and accelerates the breakdown of my paints. Okay. More and more paints break down, more and more emissions, more and more health hazards. It goes ahead and causes mutation. Right. So you have more invasive species that could come up, more harmful species that could come up. Okay. And it decelerates my mechanism, my metabolism. It slows it down, my productivity goes down, which means my metabolic activity goes down. It's a direct correlation. Yes, you know that ozone layer causes decline of productivity, which is happening. Why? Because the rate of your metabolism is decreasing, right? So which of the above are consequences of ozone layer depletion? None of the above, right? So the students who answered this question correctly, Ankita, Shubham, Pooja, Nirja, Harshit, Studying Raccoon, Yathendra, Satyabrata, Akhil, Coder, Mandeep, Manoj, Akshay, Abhishek, Ayush, Vidit. Thank you so much, guys. It was, except the first, I think many of you got all the questions correct. To the rest, I will implore you, please do consider answering the questions. I look forward to seeing your answers in the comment box. And if you understood the entire discussion today, please do not hesitate to leave me a like. It will greatly give me an encouragement and boost to my morale. Okay. On that note, it's a wrap from me, Bhuvan Apurvaja. Till I see you tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. in the next class of Indian Express Explained. Have a productive day. Bye.